Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with the ranking member's permission, I would like to request that the chart that he showed be added to the record.
Without objection?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bax, lately we've heard a lot of blaming, if you will, of global warming on a host of events happening around our world from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, everything from violent events like the formation of Isis, to the Syrian civil war, to Brexit, to the crisis at our border. In your testimony, you talked about the importance of public trust in science. I couldn't agree with you more on that, but in your opinion, is there any science that would suggest that global warming is the cause of these events?
I don't want to suggest now I'm a climate change expert, so I don't want to get into the science, but I will say that some of the references you made kind of highlight a point that I'd like to make, which is that there's a big difference between science and policy. And some of these examples, I would say I think sometimes people in science will conflate the two issues. And instead of actually analyzing a scientific issue, they are allowing their own biases to get into their science. And also, instead of actually answering scientific questions, what they're doing is they're actually answering policy questions disguised as science. So a lot of that, to me, a lot of those opinions are very subjective and are getting into the policy realm, and that becomes harmful because the public kind of sees that as a scientific answer when in fact it's really just a subjective policy.
Well, I think all of us here are interested in the truth of science, and I think it's really dangerous when we start attaching things to science that there is no, at least I'm not aware of any evidence supporting that. In your testimony, you also said that Congress has delegated significant responsibility to agencies, and the scope of those agencies concern you, as they do me. Do you think that Congress has an obligation to limit agency scope?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Congress has the lawmaking power under the Constitution. I think Congress delegates far too much power to federal agencies, and I think there's questions of whether or not too much power gets delegated to those agencies.
So along those lines, would you believe that independent studies should be looked at as well as just what comes from agencies?
Well, what I would argue in the science context for studies, I think what's critical is when you establish some processes in promoting scientific integrity, what you're doing is you're ensuring that the agencies are simply not doing whatever they want to do, but you're creating processes, and Congress is creating protections and processes in place so that the public can have confidence in what the science is, and that the public needs to be able to participate in that process. And once that happens, then at least more faith can be placed in the science that's being disseminated by the agencies.
In listening to some of our panelists today, you would think that the Trump administration is the only one where there have been issues regarding scientific integrity. That certainly is not the case. We have, you referenced, I believe, the Carter administration as well as the Obama administration. So would you agree with this is something that occurs frequently?
Well, absolutely. And in my testimony, I was just listing some examples. I mean, we could probably come up with just constant lists of examples. But I think that one point that
I think of Dr. Hauser. I believe you referenced
Dr.
him.
Hauser. And it's ironic because Dr. Hauser was actually working on the Interior's scientific integrity team and then wound up being retaliated against and getting fired.
For raising the flag of falsified information.
Exactly. So it's kind of ironic, and that was in the Obama administration. But I think it's important to note that it's not simply political appointees or political folks interfering or stifling science. It's also the processes that exist within the government, where I kind of highlighted an example of the EPA, where when they were developing their WOTUS rule, they were supposed to have a final scientific report to inform the proposed WOTUS rule. The problem was the proposed rule was published before the final scientific report was ever published. So the public is actually commenting on a proposed rule that's not even informed by the science. That undermines scientific integrity. There's many different ways the the scientific integrity is impacted beyond simply some political appointee hurting the science.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.